Plotinus, 4th Ennead, 8th Tractate. The Soul's Descent into the Body. 1. Many times it has happened, lifted out of my body into myself, becoming external to all other things and self-centered, beholding a marvelous beauty, then more than ever, assured of community with the loftiest order, enacting the noblest life, acquiring identity with the divine, stationing within it by having attained that activity, poised above whatsoever within the intellectual is less than the supreme. Yet, there comes the moment of descent from intellection to reasoning, and after that sojourn in the divine, I ask myself how it happens that I can now be descending, and how did the soul ever enter into my body? The soul which, even within the body, is the high thing it has shown itself to be. Heraclitus, who urges the examination of this matter, tells of compulsory alternation from contrary to contrary, speaks of ascent and descent, says that change reposes, and that it is weariness to keep toiling at the same things and always beginning again. But he seems to teach by metaphor, not concerning himself about making his doctrine clear to us, probably with the idea that it is for us to seek within ourselves as he sought for himself and found. Empedocles, where he says that it is law for faulty souls to descend to this sphere, and that he himself was here because he turned a deserter, wandered from God, in slavery to a raving discord, reveals neither more nor less than Pythagoras, as on many other matters, but in this case, versification has some part in the obscurity. We have to fall back on the illustrious Plato, who uttered many noble sayings about the soul and has in many places dwelt upon its entry into body, so that we may well hope to get some light from him. What do we learn from this philosopher? We will not find him so consistent throughout that it is easy to discover his mind. Everywhere, no doubt, he expresses contempt for all that is of sense, blames the commerce of the soul with the body as enchainment, an entombment, and upholds as a great truth the saying of the mysteries that the soul is here a prisoner. In the cavern of Plato, and in the cave of Empedocles, I discern this universe, where the breaking of the fetters and the ascent from the depths are figures of the wayfaring toward the intellectual realm. In the Phaedrus, he makes a failing of the wings the cause of the entry to this realm, and there are periods which send back the soul after it has risen. There are other judgments and lots and fates and necessities driving other souls down to this order. In all these explanations, he finds guilt in the arrival of the soul at body. But treating, in the Timaeus, of our universe, he exalts the cosmos and entitles it a blessed God, and holds that the soul was given by the goodness of the Creator to the end that the total of things might be possessed of intellect, for thus intellectual it was planned to be, and thus it cannot be except through soul. There is a reason, then, why the soul of this all should be sent into it from God. In the same way the soul of each single one of us is sent, that the universe may be complete. It was necessary that all beings of the intellectual should be tallied by just so many forms of living creatures here in the realm of sense. 2. Inquiring, then, of Plato as to our own soul, we find ourselves forced to inquire into the nature of soul in general, to discover what there can be in its character to bring it into partnership with body, and again, what this cosmos must be in which, willing, unwilling, or in any way at all, soul has its activity. We have to face also the question as to whether the Creator has planned well or ill. Like our souls, which it may be, are such that governing their inferior, the body, they must sink deeper and deeper into it if they are to control it. No doubt, the individual body, though in all cases appropriately placed within the universe, is of itself in a state of dissolution, always on the way to its natural terminus, demanding much irksome forethought to save it from every kind of outside assailant, always gripped by need, requiring every help against constant difficulty. But the body, inhabited by the world soul, complete, competent, self-sufficing, exposed to nothing contrary to its nature, this needs no more than a brief word of command, while the governing soul is undeviatingly what its nature makes it wish to be, and, amenable neither to loss nor addition, knows neither desire nor distress. This is how we come to read that our soul, entering into association with that complete soul, and itself thus made perfect, walks the lofty ranges, administering the entire cosmos, and that as long as it does not secede and is neither inbound to the body nor held in any sort of servitude, so long as it tranquilly bears its part in the governance of the all, exactly like the world soul itself. For in fact it suffers no hurt whatever by furnishing body with the power to existence, since not every form of care for the inferior need wrest the providing soul from its own sure standing in the highest. The soul's care for the universe takes two forms. There is the supervising of the entire system, brought to order by deedless command and a kindly precedence, and there is that over the individual, implying direct action, the hand to the task, one might say, in immediate contact. In the second kind of care, the agent absorbs much of the nature of its object. Now, in its comprehensive government of the heavenly system, the soul's method is that of an unbroken transcendence in its highest phases, with penetration by its lowest power. At this, God can no longer be charged with lowering the all-soul, which has not been deprived of its natural standing, and from eternity possesses and will unchangeably possess that rank and habit which could never have been intruded upon against the course of nature, but must be its characteristic quality, neither failing ever, nor ever beginning. Where we read that the souls or stars stand to their bodily forms as the all to the material forms within, for these starry bodies are declared to be members of the soul's circuit, we are given to understand that the star souls also enjoy the blissful condition of transcendence and immunity that becomes them. And so we might expect, commerce with the body is repudiated for two reasons only, as hindering the soul's intellective act and as filling with pleasure, desire, pain. But neither of these misfortunes can befall a soul which has never deeply penetrated into the body, is not a slave, but a sovereign ruling a body of such an order as to have no need and no shortcoming, and therefore to give ground for neither desire nor fear. There is no reason why it should be expectant of evil with regard to such a body, nor is there any such preoccupied concern, bringing about a veritable descent, as to withdraw it from its noblest and most blessed vision. It remains always intent upon the Supreme, and its governance of this universe is effected by a power not calling upon act. 3. The human soul. Everywhere we hear of it, as in bitter and miserable durance in body, a victim to troubles and desires and fears and all forms of evil, the body its prison or its tomb, the cosmos its cave or cavern. Now, this does not clash with the first theory, that of the impassivity of the soul as in the all. For the descent of the human soul has not been due to the same causes as that of the all-soul. All that is intellectual principle has its being, whole and all, in the place of intellection, what we call the intellectual cosmos. But there exists, too, the intellective powers included in its being, and the separate intelligences. For the intellectual principle is not merely one, it is one and many. In the same way, there must be both many souls and one, the one being the source of the differing many, just as from one genus there rise various species, better or worse, some of the more intellectual order, others less effectively so. In the intellectual principle, a distinction is to be made. There is the intellectual principle itself, which, like some huge living organism, contains potentially all the other forms, and there are the forms thus potentially included, now realized as individuals. We may think of it as a city which itself has soul and life, and includes also other forms of life. The living city is the more perfect and powerful, but those lesser forms, in spite of all, share in the one same living quality. Or, another illustration, from fire, the universal precede both the great fire and the minor fires, yet all have one common essence, that of fire the universal, or more exactly, participate in that from which the essence of the universal fire proceeds. No doubt the task of the soul, in its more emphatically reasoning phase, is intellection. But it must have another as well, or it would be indistinguishable from the intellectual principle. To its quality of being intellective, it adds the quality by which it attains its particular manner of being. Remaining, therefore, an intellectual principle, it has thenceforth its own task too, as everything must that exists among real beings. It looks towards its higher, and has intellection, towards itself, and conserves its peculiar being, towards its lower, and orders, administers, governs. The total of things could not have remained stationary in the intellectual cosmos, once there was the possibility of continuous variety, of beings inferior but as necessarily existent as their superiors. 4. So it is with the individual souls. The appetite for the divine intellect urges them to return to their source, but they have, too, a power apt to administration in this lower sphere. They may be compared to the light attached upwards to the sun, but not grudging its presidency to what lies beneath it. In the intellectual, then, they remain with the soul entire and are immune from care and trouble. In the heavenly sphere, absorbed in the soul entire, they are administrators with it, just as kings associated with the supreme ruler and governing with him. They do not descend from their kingly stations. The souls, indeed, as distinguished from the cosmos, are thus far in the one place with their overlord. But there comes a stage at which they descend from their universal to become partial and self-centered. In a weary desire of standing apart, they find their way, each to a place of its very own. This state, long maintained, the soul is a deserter from the all. Its differentiation has severed it. Its vision is no longer set in the intellectual. It is a partial thing, isolated, weakened, full of care, intent upon the fragment, severed from the whole. It nestles in one form of being. For this, it abandons all else, entering into it and caring for only the one, for a thing buffeted about by a world full of things. Thus it has drifted away from the universal, and by an actual presence, it administers the particular. It is caught into contact now, and tends to the outer, to which it has become present, and into whose inner depths it henceforth sinks far. With this comes what is known as the casting of the wings, the enchaining in body. The soul has lost that innocency of conducting the higher which it knew when it stood with the All-Soul, that earlier state to which all its interests would bid it hasten back. It has fallen. It is at the chain, debarred from expressing itself now through its intellectual phase. It operates through sense. It is a captive. This is the burial, the encavernment of the soul. But in spite of all, it has, forever, something transcendent. By a conversion towards the intellective act, it is loosed from the shackles and soars, when only it makes its memories the starting point of a new vision of essential being. Souls that take this way have place in both spheres, living of necessity the life there and the life here by turns, the upper life reigning in those able to consort more continuously with the divine intellect, the lower dominant where character or circumstances are less favorable. All this is indicated by Plato, without emphasis, where he distinguishes those of the second mixing bowl, describes them as parts, and goes on to say, having in this way become partial, they must of necessity experience birth. Of course, where he speaks of God sowing them, he is to be understood as when he tells of God speaking and delivering orations. What is rooted in the nature of the all is figuratively treated as coming into being by generation and creation. Stage and sequence are transferred for clarity of exposition to things whose being and definite form are eternal. Section 5. It is possible to reconcile all these apparent contradictions. The divine sowing to birth, as opposed to a voluntary descent aiming at the completion of the universe, the judgment and the cave, necessity and free choice. In fact, The necessity includes the choice embodiment as an evil. The Empedoclean teaching of a flight from God, a wandering away, a sin bringing its punishment. The solace by flight of Heraclitus. In a word, a voluntary descent, which is also voluntary. All degeneration is no doubt involuntary, yet when it has been brought about by an inherent tendency, that submission to the inferior may be described as the penalty of an act. On the other hand, these experiences and actions are determined by an external law of nature, and they are due to the movement of a being which, in abandoning its superior, is running out to serve the needs of another. Hence, there is no inconsistency or untruth in saying that the soul is sent down by God. Final results are always to be referred to the starting point, even across many intervening stages. Still, there is a twofold flaw. The first lies in the motive of the soul's descent, its audacity, its tolma, and the second in the evil it does when actually here. The first is punished by what the soul has suffered by its descent. For the faults committed here, the lesser penalty is to enter into body after body, and soon to return by judgment according to desert. The word judgment indicating a divine ordinance. But any outrageous form of ill-doing incurs a proportionately greater punishment administered under the surveillance of chastising daimons. Thus, in sum, the soul, a divine being and a dweller in the loftier realms, has entered body. It is a god, a later phase of the divine, but under stress of its powers and of its tendency to bring order to its next lower, it penetrates to this sphere in a voluntary plunge. If it turns back quickly, all is well. It will have taken no hurt by acquiring the knowledge of evil and coming to understand what sin is by bringing its forces into manifest play, by exhibiting those activities and productions which, remaining merely potential in the unembodied, might as well never have even been there, if destined never to come into actuality, so that the soul itself would never have known that suppressed and inhibited total. The act reveals the power, a power hidden, and we might almost say obliterated or non-existent, unless at some moment it became effective. In the world as it is, the richness of the outer stirs us all to the wonder of the inner, whose greatness is displayed in acts so splendid. 6. Something besides a unity there must be, or all would be indiscernibly buried, shapeless within that unbroken whole. None of the real beings of the intellectual cosmos would exist if that unity remained at halt within itself. The plurality of these beings, offspring of the unity, could not exist without their own nexts taking the outward path. These are the beings holding the rank of souls. In the same way the outgoing process could not end with the souls, their issue stifled. Every kind must produce its next. It must unfold from some concentrated central principle, as from a seed, and so advance to its term in the varied forms of sense. The prior in its being will remain unalterably in the native seat, But there is the lower phase, begotten to it by an ineffable faculty of its being, native to soul as it exists in the Supreme. To this power we cannot impute any halt, any limit of jealous grudging. It must move forever outward until the universe stands accomplished to the ultimate possibility. All thus is produced by an inexhaustible power giving its gift to the universe, no part of which it can endure to see without some share in its being. There is, besides, no principle that can prevent anything from partaking, to the extent of its own individual receptivity in the nature of good. If, therefore, matter has always existed, that existence is enough to ensure its participation in the being which, according to each receptivity, communicates the supreme good universally. If, on the contrary, matter has come into being as a necessary sequence of the causes preceding it, that origin would similarly prevent it standing apart from the scheme as though it were out of reach of the principle to whose grace it owes its existence. In sum, the loveliness that is in the sense realm is an index of the nobleness of the intellectual sphere, displaying its power and its goodness alike. And all things are forever linked, the one order intellectual in its being, the other of sense, one self-existent, the other eternally taking its being by participation in that first, and to the full of its power reproducing the intellectual nature. 7. The kind, then, with which we are dealing is twofold: the intellectual against the sensible. Better for the soul to dwell in the intellectual, but, given its proper nature, it is under compulsion to participate in the sense realm also. There is no grievance in its not being through and through the highest. It holds mid-rank among the authentic existences, being of divine station, but at the lowest extreme of the intellectual, and skirting the sense-known nature. Thus, while it communicates to this realm something of its own store, it absorbs in turn whenever, instead of employing in its government only its safeguard phase, it plunges in an excessive zeal to the very midst of its chosen sphere. Then it abandons its status as whole soul with whole soul, though even thus it is always able to recover itself by turning to account the experience of what it had seen and suffered here, learning, so, the greatness of rest in the Supreme, and more clearly discerning the finer things by comparison with what is almost their direct antithesis. Where the faculty is incapable of knowing without contact, the experience of evil brings the dearer perception of good. The outgoing that takes place in the intellectual principle is a descent to its own downward ultimate. It cannot be a movement to the transcendent, operating necessarily outwards from itself, wherein it may not stay enclosed. The need and law of nature bring it to its extreme term, to soul, to which it entrusts all the later stages of being, while itself turns back on its course. The soul's operation is similar. Its next lower act is this universe. Its immediate higher is the contemplation of the authentic existences. To individual souls, such divine operation takes place only at one of their phases, and by a temporal process, when from the lower in which they reside, they turn toward the noblest. But that soul, which we know as the all-soul, has never entered the lower activity, but immune from evil, has the property of knowing it's a lower by inspection, while it still cleaves continuously to the being above itself. Thus its double task becomes possible. It takes thence, and since as soul it cannot escape touching this sphere, it gives hither. (8) And if it is desirable to venture the more definite statement of a personal conviction clashing with the general view, even our human soul has not sunk entire. Something of it is continuously in the intellectual realm, though if that part, which is in this sphere of sense, hold the mastery, or rather be mastered here and troubled, it keeps us blind to what the upper phase holds in contemplation. The object of the intellectual act comes within our ken only when it reaches downward to the level of sensation, for not all that occurs at any part of the soul is immediately known to us. A thing must, for that knowledge, be present to the total soul. Thus, desire, locked up within the desiring faculty, remains unknown, except when we make it fully ours by the central faculty of perception, or by the individual choice, or by both at once. Once more, every soul has something of the lower on the body side, and something of the higher on the side of the intellectual principle. The soul of the all, as an entirety, governs the universe through that part of it which leans to the body side. But since it does not exercise a will based on calculation as we do, but proceeds by purely intellectual act, as in the execution of an artistic conception, its ministrance is that of a laborless overpoising, only in its lowest phase being active upon the universe it embellishes. The souls that have gone into division and become appropriated to something partial have also their transcendent phase, but are preoccupied by sensation, and in their mere fact of exercising perception, they take in much that clashes with their nature and brings distress and trouble, since the object of their concern is partial, deficient, exposed to many alien influences, filled with desires of its own, and taking its pleasure, that pleasure which is its lure. But there is always the other, that which finds no savor in passing pleasure, but holds its own even way. End of the 4th Ennead, 8th Tractate, by Plotinus. Read by Dan Attrell.